almost Halloween, and so I thought we could read a spooky story together. I've had people in the past ask me to read stories because you think that I've got a good voice for it, and so I thought we'd test out the theory with something a little bit spooky. So I'm going for a story from Glimpses of the Unknown, Lost Ghost Stories, edited by Mike Ashley. And this is a collection from the British Library, and it's stories that have never been before republished, and they're works of supernatural fiction from the early 20th century. So I thought they'd be really interesting to read and find out what the ghost stories were like at the very, very beginning of the 1900s. And the story that I've chosen is called The Mystery of the Gables by Elsie Norris. Carstone pulled aside the billiard room curtain and peered out into the darkness. "It is strange that a fine old place like the Gables should remain empty," he said. "Gray is the landlord, isn't he? I wonder he does not live there himself sooner than let it go to ruin. Should think it would worry him to see everything going to waste. 5 years ago, after Dr. Vivian died and the next tenant had left hurriedly, Gray did come down for 2 days," a voice answered from an armchair in the shadow, where Brendan lounged and smoked. "But he only remained for the 2 days, and then back he went to town. Something or other made him uneasy, and he has never been near the place since." "And no one else will go near it either," another voice chimed in. "My gamekeeper, who fears nothing in the shape of man or beast, told me a queer tale one morning. He says that he arrived home late one night and found his better half had locked him out. So he entered the Gables through the door, which is broken, and went to sleep. But he was soon out again. He says he awoke out of a horrible dream to find a dog sniffing at him, but when he put his hand out to drive the thing away, there was nothing there." "Who was this Dr. Vivian?" Carstone asked, still by the window. "Nobody knew much about him," Brendan answered. "He was supposed to be interested in some special branch of medical research, and wrote sundry learned items in papers much too dull for me to ever read, and I believe spent all the rest of his time in experiment, but what his particular line was, I do not know." Carstone drew the curtains together again and pulled his chair up to the fire. "I should hate to be baffled by a thing like that, right at my very door," he said. "I also hate it, dear boy," Brendan agreed cheerfully. "It's deuced awkward to have a haunted house almost next door. If I want a letter posted in the village after dark, both the maids have to go together, accompanied by both the gardeners, and even with the 4 of them they sometimes return scared almost out of their senses. They say there's a light up in the top window sometimes." "I wasn't alluding to that sort of inconvenience," Carstone said. "I meant the annoyance from a psychological point of view, the feeling that there is something you cannot fathom. Haven't you ever wanted to go and find out?" "Divil a bit," Brendan answered with a fervour that made his guests laugh. "I'm a good Catholic, and if there are any works of the unholy going round, I prefer to leave them well alone." "But surely you do not believe there's anything there?" Carstone asked. "I've been in a dozen or so haunted houses and have never been able to find anything. It's only superstition." "Very likely, but I don't see why I should do any detective business. It's Gray's affair." Jordan, he who had told the gamekeeper incident, chuckled. "I say, Brendan," he said, "let's make a bet that Carstone will not stay a night over at the Gables." "Certainly not," was the prompt answer. "I wouldn't go myself, and I would not like a guest of mine to go." "Actually, I'd very much like to go," Carstone said. "If there's any mystery, I should like to find it out. I'll go this very night." For some time Brendan demurred, but seeing that his old friend was bent on going, he gave in. "I'll lend you a couple of rugs," he said, "and you're to come back to breakfast at 8 o'clock tomorrow, or as soon after as you feel inclined. I don't mind telling you, though, that I think it's a harebrained scheme to go with no sense in it at all." "I shall not rest till I know what is really wrong with the place," Carstone declared. "You always were a pig-headed brute," Brendan retorted, but he went in search of the rugs. They walked with Carstone as far as the gate, where Brendan stopped and said he would not go a step further. "Not another inch do I go," he declared, "and you want to go into that dismal hole when there's a fire in your room and an eider-down bed waiting for you is a mystery. To go gallivanting after ghosts, thank heaven I'm an Irishman and sensible." "I'll come over for you in the morning, old man," Jordan said, "and I must say I admire your nerve." "Good night, and heaven protect ye," the Irishman said, half laughing, and then they turned back, leaving Carstone to enter the glooming house. It was not an enticing prospect. It looked as neglected as most houses do when they have been ignored by their owners by several years. The path that led up to the door was thick with weeds, and the shrubs had spread almost across it. The door was open, the lock evidently having been broken. He lighted his lamp, an acetylene cycle lamp that he had filled with carbide to last 6 hours, and entered. The house looked as other empty houses. Cobwebs hung from the ceilings and banisters, and dust was everywhere, and his footsteps echoed drearily on the bare boards. Most of the rooms were large, with nothing remarkable about them save that one on the basement had a concrete floor. He supposed it had been used as an engine room of some sort, and that one large room at the top was lined with shelves. He further noticed that all the walls were very thick, and most of the doors padded with baize. He went all through the house and opened every cupboard, examining the chimneys for traces of any bats or birds that might cause disturbing sounds, and stopped up every keyhole that the wind might not whistle through. Then he settled himself in a room on the ground floor and waited. It was deadly still. The district was a lonely one, and the house lay off the main road. Not a sound came from outside, and the only sound from inside was an occasional faint crackle from the lamp or a creak from the door as the wind came in from the open hall door adjacent. An hour passed. Carsten finished his third cigar and began to feel rather chilly. Through the unshuttered window he could see the lights of Brendan's house still gleaming, showing that his friends were not yet abed. Another hour. Nothing had happened yet, and he was beginning to think that nothing would happen, when suddenly he got up and went to the door, feeling the revolver in his pocket to make sure it was there. He had heard no noise, yet for some inexplicable reason he was alert. He had had the same feeling once before when he had awakened in the middle of the night from a heavy sleep. There was not a sound, not a movement, but in a flash he had switched on the electric light and his hands were at the burglar's throat. And he felt it again now, that instinct of a lurking enemy inherited from some ancestor of the forests. For several minutes he waited at the door, the lamp in one hand, the revolver in the other. The air seemed electric, thrilling with something that was disturbing, painful. He shivered with a feeling that was new to him. Every room on the basement and ground floor he explored, then went upstairs, having discovered nothing. Of the upper rooms he searched every one, till the only one left was the room with the shelves. The door of this room was closed, and outside it he paused, some instinct telling him that behind it lay the intruder, if intruder there were. So strong was the feeling that when he at last jerked open the door and flashed the light around, he was disappointed to find nothing. He went to the window and examined it. It had evidently not been opened for a very long time. He turned round, then stood motionless. At the open door stood a dog, a thin creature whose every bone showed through its yellow hide, its tongue hanging out and its lean head held stiffly to one side. "It's you brute, isn't it?" Carsten said with a laugh. "A nice specimen you are to frighten a whole village. Git!" But the animal did not move. In the surrounding darkness he could see the deep gleam of its eyes, as when one sees the eyes of a cat under a table. He took a step forward and stamped his foot with a violence that raised a small cloud of dust, but the eyes still gleamed at him from the passage. He was annoyed. It was a mangy brute anyway, and useless. His revolver spat a bullet right between the eyes in the passage, but they never moved or wavered. And then the lean brute came into the room and slank along the farther wall. Carsten noted that the hind legs dragged and that the head was held askew, as though the animal had been hurt at some time. And then, for the first time, he noticed something else. And that was that the creature made no noise. There was not a sound in the room save his own heavy breathing. He could not understand it, and so he did what many men do when there's something they cannot grasp. He lost his temper. "Confound you," he said, and another bullet flashed out. Something sniffed at his foot. Distinctly he felt something touch him, and the yellow dog still crouched by the wall, its head turned towards him in an attitude that was oddly pathetic, appealing. And then Carsten was afraid. A thrill of acute fear ran through him, a dread of something he knew not what. Some creature he could not see was still sniffing at his legs, and in a sudden panic he rushed from the room. He slammed the door as he went, but he knew that something followed him, and felt a shrinking apprehension lest it might snap at his ankles. He did not pause to get his rogue's lamp and revolver still in hand. He almost fell down the stairs, dashed headlong through the hall door and down through the weed-grown garden. Then he felt bitterly ashamed. He had been as bad as, and worse than, the other fools before him. He hesitated, half resolved to go back. "That you, Carsten?" a voice said, and the fact that he had started violently spoke eloquently to the strain his nerves had undergone. "I couldn't rest, so we came over to see what you were doing." Oh, and I'm very glad to see you, Carsten answered hoarsely. The fact is, Brendan, I don't believe I could stand another hour in that house if I tried. Neither would I. I didn't tell you before, but I may say now that Vivian was believed to be a vivisector, as Gray found dozens of animal skeletons in the garden. My own idea is that the frightful amount of suffering undergone in that place has left its impression on it. Don't know what you think. The house has got something about it that I don't understand, the other said. One of the dogs came and looked at me, and I shot it, but I did not kill it. He shivered. He was glad Brendan was with him now. He could still see the gleam of eyes and feel the snap of the invisible teeth at his ankles.